Have you ever wondered what it takes to break barriers in an industry that doesn't want you there, to become a legend before you've even reached your 25th birthday? Today, we're diving into the extraordinary life and heartbreaking death of Selena Quintanilla Perez, a woman who didn't just sing music, she became a movement, a symbol, a voice for millions who had been waiting to be heard. This is the story of the Queen of Tejano music, whose life was cut short just as she was about to conquer the world. The final days, when everything seemed perfect. March 1995. Selena Quintanilla was on top of the world, or at least it seemed that way to everyone watching from the outside. At 23 years old, she had already achieved what most artists only dream of. Her boutiques were thriving, her music was crossing borders, and she was preparing for what would be the biggest leap of her career, a crossover album that would introduce her voice to English-speaking audiences around the globe. The album, titled Dreaming of You, was nearly complete. Everything she had worked for since childhood was finally coming together. But beneath the surface of success, something was deeply wrong. Selena had been experiencing increasing anxiety about her business affairs. Her boutiques, Selena, etc., which she had poured her heart into, weren't running as smoothly as they should have been. There were complaints from customers who had paid for items that never arrived. Money was disappearing and the numbers weren't adding up. The person at the center of this storm was someone Selena had trusted implicitly for years, Yolanda Saldivar, the woman who had founded her fan club and later became the manager of her boutiques. Those close to Selena noticed the change in her demeanor during those final weeks. She was distracted, worried, caught between loyalty to someone she considered a friend and the mounting evidence that something was seriously wrong. Her family had been warning her for months. Employees had come forward with concerns. Financial records were incomplete or missing entirely. But confrontation wasn't in Selena's nature. She wanted to believe the best in people, wanted to think there was a reasonable explanation for everything. The tension had been building for weeks. Yolanda had been avoiding meetings, making excuses, becoming increasingly erratic. Selena's father, Abraham, had been pushing for a decisive confrontation, but Selena kept hoping they could resolve everything peacefully. She had given Yolanda so much trust, had elevated her from a fan to an integral part of her business empire. How could someone she had treated like family betray her like this? By late March, the situation had reached a breaking point. The family had made the decision. They needed those financial documents, and they needed them immediately. Bank records, receipts, statements, everything that would show where the money had gone. Selena agreed to meet with Yolanda one final time to retrieve these documents and to finally get answers to the questions that had been plaguing her for months. On the morning of March 31st, Selena likely woke up thinking this would just be another difficult but necessary business meeting. She probably didn't know that this day would become the day that millions of people would remember with tears in their eyes. She couldn't have imagined that by the end of this day, her name would be on every television screen and newspaper headline across the country, and that the world would be mourning the loss of one of its brightest stars. From Lake Jackson to the stage, the making of a star. But let's go back to where it all began. April 16, 1971. Lake Jackson, Texas. A small town where dreams of stardom seemed about as likely as snow in summer. Jehovah's Witnesses. Abraham and Marcela Quintanilla welcomed their youngest child into the world, a baby girl they named Selena. They had no way of knowing that this little girl would one day become one of the most influential Latin artists in American history. Music was already in the Quintanilla family's blood. Abraham had been a musician himself, part of a group called Los Dinos back in the 1950s and 60s. When that dream didn't pan out the way he'd hoped, he'd settled into a different life, working regular jobs and raising his family. But the music never left him. It was always there, humming beneath the surface, waiting for a second chance. That second chance came in the form of his youngest daughter. Selena's voice was different from the start. Even as a small child, there was something special about the way she could carry a tune, something that made people stop and listen. Abraham recognized it immediately. This was the gift he'd been waiting for, the talent that could make all those old dreams come true. But there was one challenge. Selena spoke English. She had grown up in America, in a household where Spanish was spoken, but English dominated. If she was going to make it in the Latin music market, she would need to sing in a language she didn't fully command. So Abraham made a decision that would shape Selena's entire career. He taught her Spanish phonetically, syllable by syllable, until she could perform songs with perfect pronunciation, even if she didn't always understand every word she was singing. It was an unusual approach, but it worked. Selena had an incredible ear for music, an ability to capture not just the words but the emotion and soul behind them. The family band was born, Selena y los Dinos. Selena on vocals, her brother A.B. on bass, her sister Suzette on drums, and Abraham as the manager and guiding force. They started small, playing at the family's restaurant, performing at weddings and quinceañeras, taking any gig they could get. Money was tight. There were times when the family struggled to make ends meet, when keeping the band together seemed impossible. But Abraham believed in his daughter's talent with an almost religious fervor, and that belief kept them going through the hardest times. The early years weren't glamorous. Selena spent her teenage years not hanging out with friends at the mall, but traveling in a cramped van to performances across Texas and beyond. She missed out on typical teenage experiences, on school dances and Friday night football games. Her education happened on the road and later through correspondence courses. The band was her life, her family was her best friends, and music was everything. But here's what made Selena different from other young performers grinding it out on the circuit. She never seemed to resent the sacrifice. She loved performing. She loved connecting with audiences. Even in those early days, playing to small crowds in local venues, she had a stage presence that was magnetic. When Selena sang, you couldn't look away. Breaking barriers in a man's world. The Tejano music scene in the 1980s was not an easy place for a young woman. Tejano, a genre that blended traditional Mexican music with country, polka, and rock influences, was dominated by men. The audiences were used to male performers, the record labels didn't believe female artists could sell, and there was an unspoken rule that this simply wasn't music for women to perform. Can you imagine being told that your talent doesn't matter because of your gender? That no matter how well you sing, how hard you work, you'll never be accepted because you're not what people expect? Selena faced this resistance head-on. Early in her career, there were venues that didn't want to book her, radio stations that wouldn't play her songs, critics who dismissed her as a novelty act or a gimmick dreamed up by her ambitious father. But Selena had something that couldn't be dismissed: undeniable talent and an authentic connection with her audience. She didn't just perform songs, she performed them with a joy and energy that was infectious. She danced, she smiled, she made every person in the audience feel like she was singing directly to them. Slowly, inevitably, the barriers began to crack. Her music started getting radio play. Her albums started selling. Songs like Como la Flor became anthems in Latin households across America. The lyrics spoke of heartbreak and lost love, but Selena sang them with such power and emotion that they transcended language. You didn't need to understand Spanish to understand what she was feeling when she sang. Bidi Bidi Bom Bom, with its infectious rhythm and playful lyrics about the feeling of falling in love, became a massive hit. Selena's fashion sense, the iconic bustiers, the flowing pants, the elaborate stage costumes, became as famous as her voice. She designed many of her own outfits, combining her Mexican heritage with contemporary style in a way that felt both authentic and fresh. She was creating her own lane, her own identity, and people were following her in droves. By the early 1990s, Selena wasn't just a Tejano artist. She was the Tejano artist. She had transcended the genre's limitations and become a genuine crossover star within the Latin music world. Her concerts sold out. Her albums went gold and platinum. In 1994, she won the Grammy Award for Best Mexican-American Album for Selena Live, becoming the first female Tejano artist to win a Grammy. Think about what that meant, not just for her, but for every young Latina who had been told there was no place for her in the music industry. But Selena wasn't satisfied with conquering one market. She had bigger dreams. She wanted to do what few Latin artists had successfully done before: cross over into the English language mainstream market. Not by abandoning her roots, but by expanding her reach. She wanted to show the world that Latin artists could be just as successful, just as commercially viable as anyone else. The album Dreaming of You was her vehicle for that dream. It would feature songs in both English and Spanish, showcasing the duality of her identity as a Mexican-American woman who belonged to both worlds. Trust, betrayal, and a friendship that turned fatal. Now we need to talk about Yolanda Saldivar, because you can't understand what happened on that terrible day in March without understanding this relationship. Yolanda entered Selena's life in 1991 as a fan, just another admirer who loved Selena's music and wanted to do something to support her career. She proposed starting an official fan club, and the Quintanilla family agreed. It seemed harmless enough, even helpful. Having an organized fan club would help manage the growing number of fans who wanted to connect with Selena. Yolanda threw herself into the role with an intensity that seemed at first like dedication. She was organized, enthusiastic, and appeared to genuinely care about Selena's success. As the fan club grew, so did Yolanda's role in Selena's life. She became more than just the president of the fan club. She became a friend, a confidant, someone the family trusted. When Selena decided to open boutiques selling her clothing designs, it seemed natural to put Yolanda in charge. She had proven herself reliable, hadn't she? She clearly cared about Selena. What could go wrong? But as time went on, cracks began to appear in the facade. Fan club members started complaining that they had sent money for merchandise that never arrived. Employees at the boutiques began reporting irregular financial practices. Money was missing, records were incomplete, and Yolanda's explanations became increasingly vague and defensive. When confronted, she would cry, make excuses, blame others, or claim she was being persecuted. She played the victim so convincingly that Selena, who had a generous heart, kept giving her the benefit of the doubt. Was it obsession? Was it greed? Was it some twisted combination of both? The truth is, we may never fully understand what was going through Yolanda Saldivar's mind. What we do know is that by March 1995, the evidence of financial impropriety was overwhelming. The Quintanilla family had made their decision. Yolanda needed to be removed from her positions, and they needed documentation of what had happened with the money. March 31st, the day the music died. The Days Inn in Corpus Christi wasn't a particularly memorable motel. It was the kind of place people stayed when they were passing through town, when they needed something cheap and functional. Room 158 would become one of the most infamous locations in music history. But on the morning of March 31st, it was just another motel room where two women were about to have a difficult conversation. Selena arrived that morning expecting to retrieve financial documents and end a troubling chapter in her business life. This was supposed to be about paperwork, about getting answers and moving forward. Yolanda had claimed she had the documents Selena needed. All Selena had to do was pick them up, and this nightmare would be over. She probably thought she'd be home by lunch, telling her family that it was all sorted out, that they could finally put this whole mess behind them. But Yolanda didn't have the documents. Or she had them but wasn't going to hand them over. Or maybe there never were any documents to begin with. What we know is that the conversation in that motel room didn't go the way Selena planned. The two women argued. Yolanda became emotional, erratic. She claimed she had been sexually assaulted in Mexico, a story that appeared to be fabricated to gain sympathy and distract from the real issue at hand. Selena didn't believe her, saw through the manipulation, and tried to leave. That's when Yolanda pulled out a gun. A .38 caliber revolver that she had been carrying hidden away as if she had been planning for this moment, or at least preparing for the possibility of it. Did she bring that gun to the meeting intending to use it, or was it a desperate act born from the realization that she was about to lose everything? We'll never know for certain what went through her mind in those final moments before she pulled the trigger. As Selena turned to leave, reaching for the door handle, Yolanda fired. The bullet struck Selena in the back, severing a major artery. The pain must have been immediate and excruciating, but Selena didn't collapse. In what would become one of the most heartbreaking details of that day, she ran. Bleeding profusely, mortally wounded, Selena managed to make it out of the room, across the parking lot, and into the motel lobby. She screamed for help, identifying Yolanda as her attacker, before collapsing. The motel staff called for an ambulance immediately. Emergency responders arrived and rushed Selena to Corpus Christi Memorial Hospital. The medical team did everything they could, but the damage was too severe. She had lost too much blood. At 1:13 in the afternoon, Selena Quintanilla Perez was pronounced dead. She was 23 years old. She had been married for less than 3 years to Chris Perez, the guitarist in her band, and they had been talking about starting a family. She had an album about to be released that would have catapulted her to international superstardom. She had her whole life ahead of her, and just like that, she was gone. The world mourns. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, radio stations across Texas and throughout Latin America were reporting Selena's death. Fans couldn't believe it, wouldn't believe it. There had to be some mistake, some horrible misunderstanding. How could someone so full of life, so young, so talented, be dead? How could this vibrant force of nature who had just been performing, just been working on new music, just been living her life, suddenly be gone? The outpouring of grief was immediate and overwhelming. In Corpus Christi, thousands of people descended on the Bayfront Plaza Convention Center where Selena's body lay in state. The line of mourners stretched for miles. People waited for hours in the hot Texas sun just to have a few seconds to pay their respects. Some brought flowers, some brought photos, some brought letters and mementos. They came in numbers that the city had never seen before. Over 60,000 people attended the public viewing. Think about that. 60,000 people, all united in grief, all mourning the loss of this one extraordinary woman. The funeral was held at the Seaside Memorial Park, and it was a scene of almost unbearable sadness. Selena's family, devastated beyond words, tried to find some way to process a loss that made no sense. Her husband, Chris, who had lost not just his wife, but his best friend and musical partner, was inconsolable. Her father, Abraham, who had dedicated his life to nurturing and promoting his daughter's talent, now had to face a future where all those dreams had been cut short. Her mother, Marcella, her siblings, Suzette and A.B., an entire family shattered by one senseless act of violence. Meanwhile, Yolanda Saldivar had barricaded herself in her pickup truck in the motel parking lot, holding the gun to her own head and engaging in a 9.5-hour standoff with police. She negotiated, made demands, claimed she hadn't meant to shoot Selena, said it was an accident. Eventually, she surrendered and was taken into custody. She would later be convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. But no prison sentence could bring Selena back or heal the wound her death had left in the hearts of millions. A legacy that lives forever. Here's what makes Selena's story even more remarkable. Her death didn't end her career. In some tragic way, it amplified it. Dreaming of You, the crossover album she had been working on, was released in July 1995, just 4 months after her death. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart, making Selena the first Latin artist to achieve that feat. The album went on to sell over 2.5 million copies in its first year alone. Songs like I Could Fall in Love and the title track Dreaming of You became massive hits, showing the world what they had lost and what could have been. But Selena's legacy goes far beyond record sales and chart positions. She became a symbol, an icon, a representation of dreams achieved and possibilities unrealized. For the Latino community in America, particularly for Mexican Americans, Selena was proof that they belonged in the mainstream, that their culture and their music deserved respect and recognition. She had bridged two worlds, singing in Spanish while living in America, honoring her heritage while forging her own path. She had shown young Latinas that they didn't have to choose between their cultural identity and their American dreams. They could embrace both. They could be both. In 1997, Jennifer Lopez portrayed Selena in a biographical film that introduced the singer's story to an even wider audience. The movie was a commercial and critical success, and it launched Lopez's acting career into the stratosphere. But more importantly, it ensured that a new generation would learn about Selena, would discover her music, would understand her impact. Parents who had mourned Selena's death could now show their children why she mattered, why her loss still hurt so deeply. Today, decades after her death, Selena's influence is everywhere. You can hear echoes of her style in modern Latin pop. You can see her fashion influence in contemporary designers. Her music still plays on radio stations, still fills dance floors, still makes people sing along with tears in their eyes. Museums have dedicated exhibits to her. Her hometown of Corpus Christi has a statue in her honor. MAC Cosmetics released a makeup collection inspired by her. Google honored her with a doodle. She has become a permanent part of American cultural history. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of Selena's legacy isn't what she accomplished, though those accomplishments were extraordinary. It's what she represented. She represented the power of authenticity, of staying true to yourself even when the industry tells you to be something else. She represented the importance of representation, of seeing someone who looks like you, sounds like you, comes from where you come from, achieving great things. She represented joy and connection and the universal language of music that transcends all barriers. When you listen to Selena's music today, you're not just hearing songs. You're hearing the voice of a young woman who believed in dreams, who worked tirelessly to achieve them, who brought happiness to millions of people. You're hearing someone who faced discrimination and skepticism and doubt, and who answered all of it with talent, determination, and grace. You're hearing someone who died far too young, but who, in her brief time on this earth, made an impact that continues to resonate with power and beauty. The question that haunts us: how do you measure a life cut short? How do you quantify potential unfulfilled? Selena was 23 when she died. Think about all the music she never got to make, all the barriers she never got to break, all the joy she never got to bring into the world. Think about the children she never had, the concerts she never performed, the dreams she never realized. What would Selena at 40 have accomplished? At 50? At 60? What would her career trajectory have looked like if she had been given the chance to fully cross over into mainstream success? Would she have become one of the biggest stars in the world? Would she have opened doors for countless other Latin artists? We'll never know the answers to those questions, and that's part of what makes her loss so tragic. We're left with only what was. With the recordings she made, the performances she gave, the memories she created. But maybe that's enough. Maybe what she accomplished in her short life is proof that impact isn't measured in years but in the depth of connection you make with people. Selena may have only had 23 years, but she used them to touch millions of lives, to change an entire industry, to become a legend. Her story is a reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change, how important it is to appreciate the artists and the people we love while they're still here. But it's also a reminder of the enduring power of art, of music, of a voice that refuses to be silenced even by death. Selena's music still plays. Her influence still shapes the industry. Her story still inspires. In that way, she's never really gone. She lives on in every young Latina who picks up a microphone and dares to dream. She lives on in every song that celebrates Mexican-American identity. She lives on in the hearts of fans who still remember where they were when they heard the news of her death, who still feel that pang of loss when they hear her voice. The Queen of Tejano may have left her throne too soon, but her crown remains untarnished, her legacy undiminished. Selena Quintanilla Perez died on March 31, 1995, but her spirit, her music, and her message of hope, pride, and perseverance live on forever. And that, in the end, might be the greatest tribute we can give her. To remember not just how she died, but how magnificently she lived.